The story begins like this. It was a warm summer day. A little boy, who we don't know his name yet, came to check on the grave. On the way he managed to pick a small bunch of flowers and put them on the grave. He asked, "Peter, you're doing well, aren't you?" Turned to the man who's already dead. As he looked around, he noticed that this year a great many flowers were blooming near the grave. "Oh, I wish they could look at them together," said the little boy. He cried because he really misses Peter. He's fine, so he doesn't have to worry. Here he remembered something good, and with a smile he wanted to tell Peter that he knew what had happened today. Someone behind him came up behind him and started calling him names, saying, "Hey, poop!" He was about to take another big poop, and one of the guys yelled, "How many times a day do you poop? That's a lot of stealing and eating." The boy jumped up and said he wasn't stealing anything. But the three boys said, "Yeah, sure. Then why are you sitting here? I don't understand." "That's right," the boys shouted. "You come here every day to poop, don't you? Ew, it stinks. And Ronnie pooped, they started instead of yelling. The boy, now we know his name is Ronnie, and said it was not true. He felt very hurt and cried bitterly. The boys asked him, "Then why are you lying? You said you were going to the bathroom and you ended up here." "Yeah, you do that every day," said one of the boys. "See, they're right," the guys said, but Ronnie says they're not. Another boy ran over to them and shouted, "Hey, we're having a meeting today! Everybody run!" Everyone turned around, saw a third man yelling, "Gather round, boys! Questions, why gather? What happened?" The boys looked at each other and said, "We don't know, he's calling us. Let's go faster." All the boys ran into the classroom and lined up in a row. The teacher came in and said, "Great, you're all here." The teacher said they'd better be quiet, but our Ronnie wondered what was wrong. The teacher said, "Do you think there will be another chance like this? There are no girls in the room, and he has a surprise for them." "Ah, Duke, I brought all the boys." All the boys were surprised, and the Duke began to whisper and look out to see where he was going. A Duke appeared on the threshold. He was very handsome in beautiful clothes, and there was a girl beside him. "Are these really the angels she read about in the books?" said the girl. The teacher replied, "I hope they like some of the kids, and of course you can always take someone just to play with." One of the boys, "Take me," and only Ronnie stood there with frightened eyes thinking, "Wow, this is great." He immediately remembered Peter, his deceased friend, talking about it. "If you become a toy for the master, he will train you. It's going to be a very tasty and hearty meal every day." Ronnie stood there shyly, not sure what he should do, as suddenly it seems to be a young lady who came with the Duke noticed our protagonist, Ronnie. All the boys were certainly good, and all were trying to pay attention, and only Ronnie stood shaking on the sidelines, not knowing what to do or how to speak. Duke noticed him at once and asked the girl. The lady came over and said, "Honey, you don't have to worry about anything. They just want to ask a few questions." She walked over to Ronnie and stroked his head, and then suddenly he didn't get up and looked at the lady. The girl immediately saw how handsome he was. She didn't think there were such handsome people in the world. Ronnie bowed and said, "Excuse me," but the girl said there was no need to apologize. "How old is he?" she asked. Ronnie replied that he was years old. The lady said, "Oh, what a good age." The lady turned to the Duke and said, "Dear, I choose this child." The Duke replied, "Well, excellent choice. I'm sure this child will be to your liking." Ronnie opened his mouth in surprise and didn't know what to say to him. The lady leaned over to Ronnie and asked what his name was. The little boy replied that his name was Ronnie. And so it was that Ronnie was taken to a beautiful palace and brought into a room. It was huge for him, of course. He noticed at once how much space there was in it. He feels like this room alone is bigger than the whole orphanage he's been living in all this time. The boy started looking around. He thought he probably shouldn't touch anything in here. And there was a knock on the door, and they asked. Ronnie said yes. Then two governess girls came in, and they had a table on wheels, and on the table there were lots of delicious cakes and tea. "Asked you the child that Mrs. Ronnie brought?" "That's right. That's me." The maid said mistress said to wash you. "Come on, let's go." Ronnie asked if he had to wash. The maid replied, "Of course. How can you show up like that in front of the gentleman? Then he'll do it himself." He told Ronnie if he could wash himself. Irony turned on the wallpaper and made a very pathetic face and asked me to please let me buy everything myself. The maid said, "Okay, fine, but just wash up properly." The second maid asked the first, "What are you doing?" And she poured the tea, says, "The child seems to be very much distressed." She handed him a glass and said, "So take it and drink it." Ronnie reached out and took the glass and told him really he could. The maid said, "Sure, go ahead and drink it." Wow, this is real glass, said Ronnie. He can even see the tea moving inside. Ronnie was admiring the glass so much that it slipped out of his hands. The glass fell and broke, and Ronnie got really scared. What to do? He thought they would start to get mad at him. He started crying, said, "I'm sorry," and immediately began to put the glass away. But the maid said, "Get away, you'll hurt yourself. We'll clean it up, it's nothing." Ronnie began to cover himself with his hands somehow, but the maid understood nothing. She asked what was wrong, but Ronnie said, "Nothing, it's all right." But he looked at the boy and then thought, "Let's change clothes with you first." The boy asked what. The maid said they would help you change your clothes. But Ronnie said he would do it all himself. The governess girls started pulling off his clothes, shoes, pants, and saying, "He just don't move, wait." But Ronnie fought back, saying, "Wait, if I do it myself." When the maids took off his pants, they were very much surprised, saying, "You are? Trouble?" Ronnie stood there thinking, "Mommy, what should I do? After all, they found out that I'm not a boy, but a girl. A few years ago, it was winter outside. A girl leaned over to a little girl and said, 'Little girl, listen. You can't let anyone know you're a girl.'" "Well, why not, Mommy?" replied the child. This kid's mom said it would be their big secret. The girl must keep this secret until she and her mom meet again. The mom asked the girl. She understood, and the girl said, "Yes, all right, Mommy, I understand." She promises. The maid, of course, went to the Duchess and told her the whole truth, that it was not a boy, but a girl. "Yes, she really is a girl," the maid said, and she seemed to be hiding it from everyone, so it seemed to her. The maid said she locked her in a room to tell you all what to do with her. The Countess said they couldn't leave it like that. "Change her into the girl's clothes," the maid said. "All right." The Countess was very pleased. She's a pretty little thing, but a girl she couldn't even think or imagine. While the maid went to see the Countess, then Ronnie was left alone in the room. She huddled in a corner and didn't know what to do now. For her mother had told her that she was not allowed to show her face as a girl. Sat there and just cried very bitterly. Oh, and the Dukes wanted a boy and she tricked them. They'll probably be mad too, the girl thought. She'll probably have to go back to the orphanage because everyone will give up on her. When the maids returned, one of them said, "Okay, we have to go swimming." Ronnie was very surprised that she had not been sent anywhere, but was being taken to bathe. The maid said, "We must hurry for they are waiting for you." They took the girl to a very fancy room. It was their bathroom. There was a huge tea and water in the middle of the room. There was a lot of foam and very warm water. Everything around it was shiny and sparkling. Notice that the water was so warm. Before she had only had to bathe in cold water. She was very much held by one thought. She had deceived the Dukes, but they continued to treat her well. The maid took out a pink-colored washcloth, very fluffy and soft, and said, "Okay, let's wash up." Well, Ronnie shouted that she could wash herself. But that's the maid's job. The maid began to bathe the girl, soaping her with a washcloth. When all the dirt was washed off, the maid saw a lot of bruises on the girl's arms and back. Ronnie sat in the bathroom not knowing what was going to happen to her now. When they finished bathing Ronnie, she was combed, dressed in a beautiful dress, and taken to the Dukes. When they came to their door, they knocked and said, "We have brought the girl." The Duchess said, "Come in." When they saw the girl, the Duchess said, "Ah, we've been waiting." But Ronnie sprang to her knees at that very second and began to bow and apologize. But the Duchess said they didn't call her in to punish her, so you can get up and calm down. When Ronnie rose, the Duke and Duchess saw her as a lovely little girl. She was very pretty, with blonde hair and a pink dress with a bow on her head. While the Dukes were admiring the girl, another child came into the room saying, "Mom and Dad, did you really bring a friend for me?" But the Duchess smiled and said, "Oh, Andy, we were just about to call you." He shouted, "He said he needed friends." It was Duke Marquez's second son, Andrea Marquez. Ronnie looked at Andy and thought, so he was the one who needed a friend, not the Dukes. The kids stood across from each other and made eye contact. Andy asked, "Who's that?" "Mommy, did you buy him a toy?" asked the boy. Ronnie coughed and said, "A man, not a doll, sir," Andy said. "What?" Countess replied. She wanted to bring him a friend, but it turned out to be a friend. A girl. A real person. Ronnie bowed and said, "I apologize for this deception, sir. She knows you wanted a boyfriend." But Andy smirked and said, "Ah, yes, he doesn't need a friend at all." Then the girl cried and begged the boy to forgive her and not to kick her out. And somehow Ronnie was able to melt that boy's heart. He looked into her eyes and just loved her and said, It's a miracle. Andy ran up to his parents and asked them, "There's no girl in the family, is there?" "Then that would be his sister," he shouted. Walking up to his father, he said, "Father, I don't care if it's a girl, don't kick her out, okay?" Duke asked, "Didn't he say he needed a friend?" But the boy cried out, "No such thing." While Andy ran around and talked her parents into it, Ronnie stood there confused. She didn't know what else to say to talk them into it. He really likes her. She's so cute. She heard those words and thought, he likes her, then maybe... Duke stood up and said, "Enough. They've seen enough of her. It's getting late. Everyone go back to your rooms." Ronnie went back to her room very upset. She thought, why did she even expect anything from this? Well, she really wanted to get into their family. Surely she couldn't be forgiven so easily. The next morning, Andy and his mom tried to talk the Duke down. The Duchess said, "Honey, think it over. Can you imagine being mad at her when they get back? They'll think she's done something wrong." And the son chimed in, sitting up for sure. Duke replied firmly, "Still can't agree with you?" Duchess again, "Honey, come on, think about it. Andy is screaming too, father, please let's keep her." Duke shouted that he couldn't when she was so cute. Yes, just as he thought, he wants a daughter. Indeed, how can a child be so cute, the Duke thought. How jealous he was that someone else had a daughter too. And since my son's friend is with a girl, it's no accident. We'll keep her with us for now. "Darling!" exclaimed the Duchess. "Hurrah!" shouted the son. All were overjoyed at the decision. Andy thought he would finally have a little sister. Duchess was already beginning to wonder whether or not she would need to be adopted. The Duchess asked the Duke, "Darling, if you weren't going to send her back, why were you so cold to her?" "What are you talking about?" the Duke asked. "Well, you told her to get out of her room quickly." "When did I say that?" said the Duke. "She just seemed very tired and wanted to rest." "What are you talking about, father?" said Andy. "Your face was so grim, like you were going to kill her." Already the maid knew of this news and went to tell it to Ronnie. "Was it true?" said the girl. She couldn't believe it. The maid said, "Yes, as long as you can stay here." Ronnie asked, "Even though she is a girl?" The maid replied, "That's right. So she has succeeded in becoming the Lord's girlfriend, perhaps," replied the maid. Great, thought Ronnie. That means they've forgiven her. The maid stood there thinking. She doesn't understand. She's just an ordinary child. How could she be brought into the family at once? And why did they leave her behind, a girl too? But Ronnie stood and still bowed and said thank you, even to the maids. She'll do anything. She can clean. She can draw water. She really knows how to work. The maid said, "You'd better leave that. Come on, the Duke will be down soon." This Duke really freaked Ronnie out a lot, but because his face was really his first time, kind of pissed off. The maid said, "Then that's why you don't need to disturb the Duke. Just be quiet and calm." The maid and Ronnie approached the room where the Duke and Duchess were. The door opened and the Duke stepped out. Coughing, he asked, "Did you have a good rest?" He addressed the girl but didn't see her right away. The maid was not confused and said, "If you want the girl, she's right over there," and pointed with her hand. Ronnie sat huddled in a corner, shivering. Duke came over, bent on one knee, and said, "Child Row?" She did not answer. "Everything all right with you?" he was wondering. "Jay let her stay here." He asked, "Did you have a good rest, Ronnie?" The girl replied that she had. Very, very well rested. She had never had such a good night's sleep at the orphanage. She immediately thanked the Duke for letting her stay here. "Thank you very much indeed," she said. Duke apologized for not introducing himself properly right away. How hard it must have been for that child to be so afraid of people. He didn't come here for her apology. Holding out his hand to her, he said, he came here to give her a new name. She and her family were discussing that Ronnie looks very much like a man. "But you're a girl, and you're very pretty. Duchess and I had once thought about what we'd name a baby girl if we had one." "So your name is Rosny Evelyn," the girl began muttering under her breath. "Rosny, Rosny," and the Duke tensed up. He thought she didn't like it. "Oh no," exclaimed the now retailer. "She really liked the name, it's pretty enough." And she continued again, thanking, "Really, thank you so much for keeping me and giving me a new name." The Duke asked the maid if the girl had been assigned this room. The maid replied, "Yes, that's right, Duke." Then, "Give the girl Sophia's room," he said. "He thinks she'll be comfortable enough in that room." The Duke turned and left, but the maid was puzzled. That room was occupied by another man, the Duke's younger sister, Lady Sophie, the maid thought. And he wants to give her room to this little brat. Then the room opened and the Duke came back, and he had forgotten to say. The maid, already smiling evilly, thought that surely it must be some mistake, and they would change her room back now. Why would he give a room to a normally orphan girl, thought the maid. The Duke leaned toward the girl and said briefly, "We're all gonna call you Roro, so remember Roro." A little Roro flashback from the orphanage. It was already evening, the teacher shouted at her Ronnie. "It's you, boy! It's you who stole all the food of our guests!" "No, it wasn't me," really screaming back. "How dare you lie, taking a swing at a child?" That's why she has bruises, and when someone raises her hand, she's always twitching and covering her head with her hands. This is the kind of memory or scary dream I had on her second night. She was all sweaty and moaning something true. It wasn't me. She was talking. A passing maid thought the sun had long since risen. Why she was still asleep she could not understand. The maid touched her with her hand to shake her a little and wake her up and called her quietly. But she had a dream with her tutor beating her, and she kept repeating that she was hurt. The maid screamed, "Get up," and almost knocked the maid down. The maid said she startled her. "Why jump up so abruptly?" But Roro was afraid herself because she had had a scary dream. She told herself it was only a dream. The maid said indignantly, "What are you sitting there for? Aren't you going to wash your face?" "Quickly to the bathroom," she said. "Oh yeah." Roro jumped out of bed and ran. When she got to the bathroom, she stared into the water, or rather, at her reflection in it. The water was warm. She was surprised that the water had even been heated for her. And then Roro thought that, so it wasn't a dream yesterday, but everything was real. God, she needs to be taught how to wash her face too, thought the maid. She's a simple girl with no lineage like me, thought the maid. Why then do the Dukes treat her so well? The maid threw the towel right in her face with the words, "It's jiccapated," on the floor, but the girl didn't notice any stiffness here. She said, "Thank you." If she's finished washing her face, she needs to get dressed soon. On the bed was a very beautiful green dress with pink sleeves and collar. She was very surprised at the beauty. Roro thought, "Can she wear such expensive clothes?" And the maid resented her. "What are you stuck in there for? Hurry up and get dressed." "Can't even get herself together," said the maid. Ro replied, "Oh no, she knows everything." "She can do it herself," the maid replied. "Good, that's for sure. You should be able to." And left. So Roro stood in front of the dress and said, "So now you have to wear this." Then a servant girl's voice rang out, "Sir, don't run around like that, or mistress hasn't had time to get dressed yet." Andy said nothing. "Mommy wants to hurry up and look at her too." And a boy just burst into the room saying, "Roro!" "Sir, one must knock before entering a girl's room," said the maid. "Rosny, your little brother is here," he said. The maid came in and said hello to the girl. "Rosny, hello. Did you sleep well today?" The girl replied, "Ah, good afternoon." Hearing the words about how she was feeling, Roro thought, "What are they talking about?" The maid looked at the girl and said, "Well, that's something you should know how to do, Roro." She said, "Ah, that's all right. What are you talking about?" Roro replied, "It's nothing like that," Mr. Andy said. "Mister, I told you to call him brother." Then the maid said, "Get dressed quickly and go out. He will be waiting outside." Roro approached the maid and asked if she could help keep her bruises a secret. "All right, yes, I can keep it. Let's get dressed together then," the maid said. "Mistress is already waiting for you." There was a generously set table with many different delicious dishes. Roro has never seen so much food anywhere in her entire life. The Duchess said she doesn't know what the baby likes, so you can have whatever you want. The little girl said, "Thank you very much." Duchess asked how the girl slept and if she liked her clothes. Roro replied, "I like everything very much." Andy offered Roro a taste of his plate. He took some delicious dish and offered it to the girl. Andy said it tasted better when you ate it all at once, and shoved a whole piece into his mouth. Duchess made a remark to Andy about what he was doing. It was the first time Roro had ever seen food like that. The girl also tried putting a whole piece in her mouth like her brother. Duchess and Andy stared at her with big round eyes. They were very interested in how she would eat. Roro somehow mesmerized them all. They wanted to look at her and look at her. "So delicious," exclaimed Roro. "It's tastier than that. I've never eaten anything before." "Really, she'll listen to me now," Andy said. Duchess said that Andy should behave himself and be an example to his little sister. Also, the Duchess went on to say that, of course, her older brother always eats a lot of vegetables. Roro was so engrossed in her meal that she didn't realize her sleeve was almost in her plate. Andy noticed and said, "Roar, your sleeve's dirty." He showed her respect and said that his brother would help you roll up your sleeve and started to undo the button on the sleeve. When he pulled it up, It showed the bruises that Roro wanted to cover up. The first time the boy has seen so many bruises, he's never been beaten, and he doesn't know what they are. Roro screamed. No, she didn't want anyone to see her bruises. Andy, grabbing her arm, said, "Wait, what's wrong with your arm?" Lunchtime, the Duke and Roro are headed somewhere. Koreans are completely silent. All are silent. Roro thought she followed the Duke, but she doesn't know where he's taking her. She imagines she's being brought back. That's why the tears rolled down her eyes. Duke saw that Roro was upset and handed her a handkerchief to keep her from rubbing her face with her hands. A few hours earlier, when they were sitting at the table after Andy had found bruises on her arm, the girl got up from the table and fell to her knees on the floor, begging Andy not to send her away. The Duchess said, "Oh my God, baby. What makes you think that? Why do we have to send you away?" Because she doesn't want to show her wounds this way. Because it's not pretty. It doesn't fit this place. And she apologizes, she's sorry. Now we're back in the real Roro, and the Duke is still riding in the carriage. He asked her if he could ask her one question. The principal said that if she was kicked out, she would be punished like this. He also added that he beat you. The Duke noticed that the Roro was still afraid of him. Did she happen to think he'd hit her? "No!" exclaimed Roro. "Then why did you think we'd kick you out, if she's uncomfortable? With us, he can find another place for her. However, they want her by their side, of course, if that's okay with her." Duke said she could take it easy. Roro drove the whole way and looked out the window. As they approached the building, she noticed that it was her shelter. They drove up to the entrance. The Duke got out of the carriage and gave his hand to Roro. She was very frightened and said, "Mr. Duke." The headmaster, on seeing them, said, "Oh my goodness, your lordship's here." He bowed and asked what brought you here. Roro looked out of the carriage with the corner of her eye and was afraid to get out. The director saw that they had come along with Roro. He said, "Oh, you came along with the child. You are lucky. Apparently you brought the princess to make friends." The Duke walked over to the carriage, gave his hand to Roro so she could get down and show herself to the headmaster. The principal recognized Roro. He shouted, "Roro, how dare he come here?" Duke said that this child is a girl. The principal asked, What do you mean, a girl?" "He apologizes and should have been more careful," the principal said. "He said she just lied a lot and he bought it too. It was that liar Ronnie who tricked him." The principal said that no amount of punishment could have reformed this child. "She has such bad manners," the headmaster said. Duke was already angry when he heard Roro being spoken of poorly, and now he realized why he cared for her so much. She enjoys the little things and smiles brightly. As he stroked her head, he realized he wanted to protect her innocent heart. "She has nothing to worry about," Duke said. "I'll teach that little one manners," the principal shouted. "Cheater," said Roro. Roro couldn't stand it and shouted, "It is you, Principal Peter, who knows that her friend Peter is not guilty of anything." "What's that?" he said, and started making excuses that he didn't know anything. Roro said he beat him to death. What is she carrying?" "Duke." "She's lying again," shouts the headmaster and points his finger at her. Duke said, "How dare he say such a thing in his territory? Take him away." 2 guards grabbed the director under his arms and took him away. The principal resisted and shouted, "Where to? Wait a minute! Are you just going to take this girl's word for it?" "It's not fair! Let me go!" shouted the principal. And Roro just wanted someone to believe her, nothing more. When it was over and the Duke and Roro arrived at their castle, the Duchess and Andy jumped out to meet them. Everyone rushed over to Roro asking if she was all right. They didn't pay any attention to my father. Duchess said, "Thank God, baby girl, she was so worried." Andy confirmed that he was worried too. Duchess hugged her 2 current children and told Roro, "She's very kind and sweet. Deserves love." Only Andy tried to get out from under Mommy's arm with the words, "Let go, Mommy." Only the girl kept wondering about all these behaviors shown to her. How can it be? Such good people are worried about her. She was ready to cry with happiness. Duchess hugged her tighter when she saw Roro start to cry. And Andy asked again, "Are you really, really okay?" The girl replied that everything was perfectly fine and smiled at them. "Everything is definitely fine now." The Duchess couldn't get enough of the girl. She stroked her hair. "What beautiful hair you have," she said. "Pretty soon it'll grow all the way down to your shoulders. It's going to be so beautiful." The Duchess imagined weaving ponytails, putting on bonnets. "You should put holy water on your body too, do you mind?" she asked the girl. "No," Roro said. "If you use it regularly, all wounds on the body will go away." Duchess pulled down her dress and saw that there were a great many bruises on her back. The Duchess was upset. She imagined for a moment what had been done to that child. The little girl asked the Duchess, "Can she ask a question?" The Duchess said, "Yes, of course." "Why did everyone at the orphanage think she was a boy?" the girl asked. "Her mom told her not to tell anyone she was a girl. She lied to the principal too. She doesn't know why." Duchess thought, maybe she was worried that the girl would be bullied, and that's why she said that. "Well, to cheer up Roro," she said cheerfully. "However, you don't have to hide it now. She's as beautiful as she is, and we all love you very much." The next day, the Duke called Roro into his office. There were some documents on the table. Placing his hand on one of them, he said, "Here is your identity document. I have listed myself as a trustee. Alexander Hayes Marquez. Is that the Duke's confidant Rosny or Roro?" The girl went to the table and saw a piece of paper. She could not read, but she realized that her name was written there. "Wow, that's beautiful," she said. Alexander poked a finger where something was written. He said, "This is where her official information is written down." And even before Rosny Evelyn Clave comes of age, Alexander states that he will fulfill the role of guardian as a priority, Roro interjected. "Clave? It's the surname of an aristocrat relative of theirs. After his death, no one carries that surname anymore. But it will help her a lot in her life, in her plans for her studies and her future. Then she will try very hard," Roro said. "We'll study hard to learn to write and we'll do anything they ask." She realized that though it wouldn't be enough for the Duke, she would still try very hard. Duke asked, "Can you really do anything?" Roro replied, "Yes, I can do anything." Duke told her, "Then go and play. That's all he's asking you to do." "He keeps telling him about wanting to play with her, Daddy," yells Andy. "Hurry up and bring him Roro." Duke stroked Roro's head and said that of course it wasn't just for Andrea's sake. The children's job is to run and play, is the Duke's opinion. "So go do your job," he said. Speaking of which, he hasn't had a chance to say. He may be arriving as early as today. And so the kids run out onto the lawn, lay down on the grass, and Andy says how great and fun it is to play with Roro together. "Hey, sit next to him," Andy said. "Yes, master," replied Roro. Why does she call him master? Would she call him brother? What, how can she? The Duchess asked. "No, she can't call you that, not yet," Andy said. "Then she'll call me brother when she gets used to it." He gave his little finger to her and said, "But someday she has to start calling me brother." Roro held out her pinky finger and said, "Okay, that's it," she promised, Andy said, and crossed his fingers, their little fingers, like an oath. When they had already exchanged their vows, they settled down and began to enjoy the beauty that surrounded them. There was a river with a swan floating in front of them, and there were many beautiful trees in the distance. Roro liked this view very much. Roro turned her gaze to the sky. "Isn't it beautiful, master?" and looked up at her brother. And he was silent because he had already fallen asleep and was snoring like a piglet. Roro thought he had fallen asleep and needed to watch him while he slept. She decided to walk around the lake after all. It was very beautiful, blue with clear water. She spotted a tree and remembered how she used to climb trees at the orphanage. Would she see more beauty if she climbed it? So the girl decided to try to climb it. As she was climbing, she saw something. Showed up, but the wood was kind of really slippery. Or my shoes were slippery. I almost slipped. "No, that won't do. We have to go down," she thought. "Otherwise she's going to fall." And yet it wasn't just her imagination. She saw someone silhouetted. She asked. At the same moment her arms were released and she flew down screaming. In an instant, someone jumped up and managed to intercept her in time to keep Roro from falling to the ground. She squirmed so much she was afraid to open her eyes. But when she did, she saw the guy carrying her in his arms. He was very handsome. "Is he the first gentleman?" she thought. "Thank you," Roro said, and heard someone calling her name. She asked this boy to please let her go to the ground. Just then Andy jumped out from behind a tree yelling, "Roro, there you are!" Andy noticed that there was someone standing near Roar. He said, "What about your brother? Why are you here?" Roro, when she heard her brother, raised her head and looked at him. "A brother? Is he really the first?" she thought. "Yes, you've got a nerve," said the Duchess. "Coming here and not even coming to see her." He'd already said he got here earlier than he was supposed to, so he went for a walk in the woods. Felt like it. He followed Andy to say hello at all. He was curious. Who was that pretty girl who wrote in the letter, Father? Roro thought he was going to laugh with her. He didn't get a chance to talk to the little one, YUS said. "Still, it's good that you were able to meet and get to know each other in person," the Duchess said. Their first child, Julius Caesar El Marquez. Roro noticed that he looked a lot like the Duke, his father. What are you doing, Roro? Why aren't you eating? Andy asked. Roro. That's right, her brother calls her Roro. What an interesting name. That's what our father named her. Rosny is her full name. That name suits her very well, doesn't it? Said the Duke. Yes, he thinks so too, said Julius. Julius then said he would call her Roro too, like everyone else. Andy was getting very bored at the table. He suggested that we go and play again after the meal. Roro agreed. My brother will go with them too, Andy said. Just then a butler came up to the Duke and began to whisper something to him. He voiced to everyone that they had a visitor. The Duchess interjected. A guest? Did we invite anyone? Princess Sophia arrived with her daughter. The first thing Sophia asked the maid was, where is her brother, the Duke? And his lady? They're having tea in the garden. T and his brother are at his place. Other guests? Sophia asked. And the little girl, Sophia's daughter, cried out to the maid, Who is there? Speak now! She was not kind at all. This time the Duke brought an ordinary girl. Brother, why did Sophia come? The Duke asked. How are you, Pelsera? Sophia asked. Welcome, Sophie, replied the Duchess. If you had warned us of your visit, we would have prepared and found a place for you. No, it's our own fault for coming unannounced. God, Andy, you've grown so much, he replied. How are you, uncle? Sophia's daughter greeted the Duke. Roro thought that this girl was like a princess from fairy tales. Everyone was poured tea and told to help themselves and take a seat at the table. Brother Julius, Sophia said. She hadn't expected to see him here. Julius snatched the poured tea from Sophia's daughter and handed it to Roro. Sophia's daughter whined about having her tea taken away, and Sophia didn't like it right away. She looked with her piercing gaze at this girl, and thought that her brother had brought an orphan girl into the house. The maid said, That's right. She's very bright. She got here. Pretend to be a boy. It's because my brother is too kind, Sophia said. She baited the Duke and even got an aristocratic name Sophia resented. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Sophia asked what else, and the maid said she'd been assigned your room. How dare that stupid orphan! Sophia was angry. Roro drank her tea very nervously and looked at this whole situation with big eyes. Everyone went to their rooms. As they walked down the corridor, Andy was indignant. What a shame, he said. Lydia and Auntie bring a certain discomfort, he said. Sophia's daughter is named Lydia. Roro asked why. His aunt asks him if he always comes to class and tells him to sit up straight at meals. He doesn't like it, and Lydia only listens to her older brother, and he is treated like a servant. There have already been situations where she's passed gifts through him and says, he was so hoping they wouldn't come this time. Roro didn't understand how such a beautiful girl did it. Andy said he didn't care now. After all, this time he has Roro and he can play with her. There's a lot of interesting stuff in his room. Let's go quickly, Andy said, grabbing Roro's hand. She exclaimed, Ouch! Roro, what have you got there? Andy asked. And this, replied Roro. This. She hurt her arm when she fell out of the tree. He looked at him at her hands and said what was wrong with her hands. Andy brought the rock to the doctor. He began to treat the wounds and said, Thank God you didn't hurt yourself too badly. The doctor asked, You said you fell from a tree, didn't you? But he was very surprised. The girl replied, Yes, that's right. But they are too inconspicuous for wounds that have just appeared, the doctor thought in surprise. He said her wounds were healing very quickly. Roro exclaimed, Yes, quick to heal! Plus, when he first saw the wounds, they were more serious. And now they were almost gone. He had heard that the mistress was applying holy water. He remembered her turning to him. Do you really want to use holy water? The doctor had said. The Duchess wanted at least the bodily wounds to heal faster, even though it won't get rid of the heartache. But the Duchess wanted at least the bodily wounds to heal faster. The doctor stroked the girl's head and said, It's good that her wounds are healing so quickly. If anything bothers you, you should call him, the girl said, bowed to the doctor and said, Thank you very much. She knew at once that the doctor was as good a person as mistress. Swept up, just like the young gentleman said. This doctor's treatment is excellent. Roro thought about it. She too wanted to leave as cool a doctor as this doctor was, treating people, healing their wounds. It was the first time in her life she had ever thought of wanting anything. She used to think that any action she took would only bring more pain. But thanks to the young master, the Duke, and the mistress, she's doing well. She felt like she should do something nice for them. Andy knocked on the door and asked if he could come in to see her. Have you finished your treatment? He shouted. Roro replied that yes, young master. Then let's go to his room, Andy said. When he finished speaking, someone tapped him on the shoulder with a finger. Andy turned around and saw Lydia, who said, "Hi, Andy." "Scared the hell out of me," he said. "What's he so scared of?" "No offense, she hasn't done anything yet." "Hi, her name is Ruzani, isn't it?" Lydia said and laughed. "Hello," replied Roro. "She couldn't even introduce herself properly," Lydia said. "She's Andy's cousin and Julius's brother. You can call her Lydia Rodham. She was the only girl here for a long time. She was so bored. She was very pleased with her and held out her arms to Roro. Roro, of course, unsuspecting, said thank you, and was very happy too. She doesn't mind having a girly time, by the way," Lydia said. "How's that girly time?" Roro asked. Roro thought that Lydia really is a high-ranking lady, unlike her. "So I guess she'll learn from her example how to fit in," and she said, "Okay, lady, let's go." "Then let's go to my room. Everything is already ready there," said Lydia. The girls went, leaving him alone. He didn't understand what was going on. How come everyone left without him? He was alone, and thought he'd go get his brother or something. The girls come to Lydia's room. Lydia tells them, "This is her room." Roro says, "What a nice big room. Now the maid will bring them sweets and tea, and they can begin their tea party." The maid came in saying, "Lady, she's brought you tea and desserts." "My goodness, how delicious everything looks," said Lydia. "Here, taste these tea leaves they brought from their home." When Roro picked up the cup of tea, she felt it was hot and thought she had to be careful. She carefully brought the cup to her mouth and began to blow slowly so she wouldn't burn herself when she drank. The maid who brought tea and desserts looked at Roro strangely. The girl was scared. She didn't know why you were looking at her like that. Maybe she's doing something wrong. Lydia noticed that Roro could see the maid looking at her and made a remark saying, "With Ellie, it's not nice to look at a man like that," the maid replied. "I'm sorry, lady." The maid said that while living in the Duke's house, she holds the cup with both hands and eats mockingly loudly. To not know such basic rules of etiquette is a disgrace. "It's an affront to the dignity of Mrs. Lydia sitting next to you. Stop it!" Lydia's targets shouted. "She wasn't taught that. What don't you understand? What's Rosani's fault?" Just then, someone walked sharply into the room without knocking or warning. Lydia became very nervous and shouted, "Who dares?" It turned out to be Julius. He may have saved the day, so to speak. "Why did you come here, brother?" Lydia asked. A few minutes earlier, Andy had met his brother in the hallway asking, "Where are you going, Julius?" "To practice. Why?" "Wow. Does he really want to watch him fencing? We can go with him." "Where's Roro?" Julius asked. Andy said that Lydia had taken her. Roro wanted to play with him. She's his little sister. Obviously, Lydia wants to make Roro her sister because Roro is really cute, Andy said. By the way, Julius thought, she's small and bright and cute. They're both girls. Maybe they'll even get along faster than they did with Andy. "No, Roro wouldn't do that," he said. Though Julius thought, yeah, that's a mean girl. Just like Lydia is no match for their Roro. Julius froze for some reason. He must have remembered something. And Andy shoves him from behind and yells, "Why are you frozen?" He recalled the situation when the maid accidentally spilled a glass of water on him. She apologized at once, and many times said, "I'm sorry, please." But her Les was very kind. He said she must have been scared. That's okay. No need to apologize. It's just water. But the maid was really sorry. She didn't want to. She was still so unskilled, and Lydia had seen it all. A little later, Julius was walking down the hallway when he heard some sound. As he passed the room or go, he heard her words as, "She dared to do that to brother Julius." She was talking to her friend too. Like, she dared. Julius opened the door to Lydia's room, and he saw a servant girl on the floor, beside whom Lydia was standing and shouting at her. When she noticed her brother, she said, "Brother!" "Lydia, what does she allow herself?" Julius said, walking into her room. "It was the maid who disturbed the brothers. I'm not her. Can't let her get away with it." The girl sat on the floor and held the latch. Julius walked over to the maid, helped her up, and said, "Get up and go away." Lydia was furious. What? She has the right to raise her hand to the Duke's maid? Don't you dare touch people his... Julius's memories ended. He thought that this was a different situation, and that she should not behave like this. He doesn't know what's in Lydia's head, though. At one point, he turned around and walked toward her room, and Andy could barely keep up with him, running behind him and yelling, "Brother, the training room is the other way." "Well, better go check it out, though," Julius said. We now return to Lydia and Roro's room as Lydia asks why her brother came here. Yulu began to speak. How dare she destroy a child adopted by the Duke? And this maid turned out to be such a cheeky girl, Julius said. Sir, she's only… Just then, Lydia came over and took Julius by the sleeve with the words, Brother, it's all because she didn't properly train her servant in manners, he apologizes. Rosen, I'm sorry, Lydia apologizes, instead of a maid. Yulu said that this girl can do whatever she wants in this house. No one dares to humiliate her anymore. And this servant will be taken care of by the Duke's family, he said. Rosie, don't forgive her, she couldn't take care of her, Lydia said. Roro said she really didn't know manners. Okay, we're done for the day, Lydia said. I'll see you later. Julius took Roro and they went to Andy's. On the way out, Roro said that she would like to know more about manners. But Yulu said, Don't get so worked up. This is their home, and Lydia is just a guest in it. Roro looked at Julius the more she looked at him. The more he reminded her very much of the Lord. But he looked a lot like a duke. But we can't let it go on like this, Roro thought. Her mistakes are getting everyone in trouble, and something needs to be done. Now she cannot repay the mercy Julius has shown her. But he is sure to become someone for whom there will be absolutely no shame. The next day, during tea time, Lydia asked, So she wants to take etiquette lessons with Lydia? Roro said, No, she wouldn't dare. She meant she just wanted to be around during class. Lydia thought everything was going exactly according to her plan and said she could see her tutor any time. So about taking classes with her, Roro said, Really you can. After all, it's much easier to learn by imitating someone than by yourself. Roro was truly grateful and very happy for such a chance. There was a knock and a voice came. Mistress, it's time for class. Lydia replied, All right, come in. When the door opened, a young man walked into the room. To Roro, he was like Peter, that boy, the same boy who had died from the orphanage director's blows. Roro rushed over to him saying, Peter, is that you? But the boy stood there, not understanding what she wanted from him. When Roro was able to get a closer look, she saw that it wasn't Peter, and began to apologize at once. But Lydia told her it wasn't worth it. It was her scapegoat. The noble children have people who get beaten instead during class, Lydia said. Roro asked, Why are they beaten? So it is necessary that the bodies of noble children suffer? Lydia asked, as she would also be attending classes with her. So Lydia will gladly lend a scapegoat to this boy. The door opened and the teacher came running in saying, How many times does she have to tell you not to spread your knees? Roro said, I'm sorry. Said, Sit down again, I'll watch, slapping her palm with the whip. Roro sat down and the teacher yelled again, Crooked back, wrong! Try to repeat after Lydia, squat just like she did. Don't be mad. Meme Rose didn't have the opportunity to be trained in such a thing, Lydia said. Roro's legs hurt badly. She even has trouble standing, but clearly she remembered what she had asked of the Duchess yesterday. The Duchess asks Roro, Etiquette lessons do you want to attend? The little girl, she is, after all, quite young to attend such a class, said the Duchess. But the girl begged her very much. The thing is, she's just a little girl. She can run and frolic. It's too early to think about etiquette. Well, the girl begged her a lot and said she could really handle it. The Duchess thought that after coming here to see them, it was the first time she had wanted something. Okay, but if it gets hard, you can stop any time, okay? She'll try, she said. She's had a hard time getting permission after all. A girl just can't just give up. That won't do, the teacher said, swinging her whip. Hold out your hands. And this boy who looked like Peter said, Wait. Lydia walked over to Roro and said, Think again. So why hurt your hands? I mean, she lent you Leon, that boy who looks like Peter. But Roro said firmly that she was guilty, which meant she would take her own punishment. After all, it's her mistake, and she can't let another person be responsible for it. God, said Lydia. Is she making fun of her and the other noble children? No, no, no way, shouted Roro. In that case, she respects her, Lydia said. Roro held out her hands to punish the teacher. All that came from the room was the slap of 1,000 lashes on her arms with a whip. It's been a few days. Andy runs down the corridor with a basket and shouts, I'll take Roro with me and we'll go to the sea or the woods. Andy was very excited. He finally had time to play games with Roro. Andy remembered their conversation a few days ago, when he had said to forgive him, and from today he would attend fencing lessons with his brother. But Roro didn't take offense, and said that she too would be attending etiquette lessons at the same time. Somehow they both became suddenly busy. Andy burst into the girl's room saying, Roro, I'm here. It's been so long since we've seen each other. And then he got really scared and dropped his basket of cookies. Roro said, Sir, you have come. And Andy tearfully wailed, Roro, what's wrong with you? Andy was in a panic. He was running around the room yelling, "How can you not be worried? She's turned into a skeleton!" And the girl would calm him down and tell him it was okay. "There's still a lot she doesn't know," she said. "And yet who did this to you?" shouted Andy, and he wouldn't let him get away with it. Roro started crying for some reason, either from fatigue or because she wasn't getting anywhere. Roro asked Andy, "Are you crying?" "No, nothing," she said. "Who dared do that to his sister?" shouted Andy. "No, it's not true," whimpered Andy. "It's no big deal," said Roro. "Mommy swears when food is on the floor," Yulia said as she walked into the room, picking up a cookie. When Roro saw Yulia, she ran right away, and Andy followed her, saying, "Where are you going?" "No, she can't show up like that in front of the Elder Lord." The brothers stood beside their sister and asked Roro, "Really won't say anything? You both got really mad, but she's really fine and everything's fine. She just wasn't feeling well." The boys noticed that their sister's hands were just all over the wounds and abrasions. Andy shouted, "Let's get the doctor!" But Yulia said, "Put the overturned basket away and get some new snacks." Yulia with, "Is that important right now? Or what?" "Roro is more important, isn't it?" "Should he tell his mom that Andy threw the food on the floor?" Julius asked. But he didn't. It had happened by accident, and carrying new snacks. Julius pulled his clean handkerchief from his jacket and held it out to Roro with the words, "Don't hide anything." "Doesn't know what about." "It's Yulia asking her," Roro said. Yulia stood up. Roro said she was really okay, but at the same time she kept crying. Yulu said he would take care of her and pulled out some kind of box. Then he started applying something to her hands and asked, "Does it hurt a lot?" "It'll heal soon," he replied. Roro asked where the mistress was. Yulus replied that he would handle it, and she to lie down to rest. But the girl jumped out of bed and said she would go with him. She didn't want to be alone in the room. "And why alone? Where is her maid?" asked Julius. He turned and looked around the room. "By the way, why is she really alone? This isn't an empty room, is it? Why isn't the fireplace lit?" thought Julius. Julius remembered again how a few days ago he had heard the maids talking, but had not realized who they were talking about. Did they hide her well? He thought. They hid her well? Aye, let's light her up. The maids were talking among themselves. "It's infuriating. Why do they have to do stuff like this? Threw a bunch of dresses in the basket. That's the only way she'll know where she belongs," one of the maids said. He realized they were talking about her. "The parents are being careful not to burden this little girl," another maid said. Julius, which the maid thought of, approached the Duchess and held out the letter to her. After reading the piece of paper, the Duchess said he wanted to talk, and asked her to go to the rose room as he wanted to talk. Sitting across from the Duchess was Sophia, who said, "Oh my God, is something wrong?" "It's nothing serious. It's just that Julius wants to talk about Rosenyi." "I'm sorry, Sophia, but she needs to step away, that's okay. Let's go together. I'm just as she's just about to pick up Lydia." "Persera, you really don't think of rescinding the order to her servant? She only misspoke, didn't she?" "Why fire her?" laughed Sophia. The Duchess replied, "This little girl was personally brought to our home by her husband and your brother. And being rude to that little girl means disrespecting our family, Marquez," Sophia said and laughed. "That's how understandable. How dare she threaten her? Who has blood flowing in her, Marquez, with the same last name?" Sophia thought. Okay, it's going the right way. Anyway, she didn't like acting like the mistress of the family. "Sophia, she has a favor to ask of you. From now on, warn her about your visits," the Duchess said. "Hee, she just grew up here, so she forgot," Sophia said with a laugh. I wonder, I thought, how long they can keep this baby safe. The girls proceeded to Roro's room. As they walked down the corridor, they heard shouting. "Then who took it?" shouted Lydia at her two maids pushing the tray of cups and teapot. As they got closer, they realized it was Lydia's room and she was screaming. Entering the room, the girl rushed in with the words, "Mother, Aunt Sophia," she asked. "God, what's wrong?" "The necklace, it's gone!" Lydia screamed. Sophia asked in a surprised voice, "Missing how?" "It was Daddy's present, it's very dear to her," Lydia began to cry. Sophia said, "Don't worry, we'll all find him quickly now." "Who dared steal her thing?" "A relative of the Duke of Mark and wife of the Marquis," said Sophia indignantly. Thought hard. "Did you check everyone in this room?" And then with a smile, Lydia said, "She hasn't asked Rosny yet. She and I often took etiquette lessons," Lydia said. Sophia said, "Then let's go to Rosany's." A few days earlier. "Mommy, it's a creep, isn't it? Lives in your room," Lydia said. That's nonsense. It's not like she doesn't understand. Where she came from, cried Lydia. Sophia thought she was being treated this way because she had no family divine power. Divine power. The power over the world of heaven that came from the first elven emperor. It manifested in the royal family. Some families who inherited the lineage of the first emperor. But now, hundreds of years later, this power was left only to the royal family and Duke Marquez's family. Divine power means more than just power, but also legitimacy equal to royalty. Julius already has that power, so if Julius and Lydia were to marry, Sophia thought, then everything would be hers. Everyone gathered in Roro's room. The girl sat wondering why the lady and mistress had come to her room. By the way, it's been a long time since we all had tea together, Sophia said. How are things at the academy, Julius? She asked. She heard that he finished the semester with honors. Yulu said he was just lucky. God, he's so modest. Tell us all more about the academy, Sophia said. Lydia asked everyone if you all enjoyed the tea. We brought it from our home. Lydia noticed Roro holding a cup of tea. She clapped her hands together. And she said, already holding the cup so well, Roro, she said, thank you so much. Roro noticed that everyone was looking at her, and she didn't realize what she was supposed to do. As it turned out, it was a distraction. While everyone was looking at Rora, the maid spilled tea on the table and on the carpet. With the words, I'm sorry, lady, the maid began to clean everything up. Lydia said it was nothing, except that the carpet is soaked, but the maid said she'd wipe it right away and nothing would be left. The maid leaned under the table to wipe it all up and said, Lady, what's this? Is this really your thing that you have been looking for so much? Of course, Sophia and Lydia made very round eyes and surprised faces, that this was the first time they were seeing it. Roro sits there not realizing what's going on. Something has been found under her table. Lydia yells at the maid what it is. It's her necklace. Lydia turns to Roro and starts yelling at her. She said she wanted to hide it here until we left, but the girl says with frightened eyes, No, she really doesn't know anything and she didn't hide it. Sophia said, What ingratitude, Duchess. What is it the Duke's family showed mercy? And this girl allows herself to touch other people's things. But the Duchess does not panic at all, and just quietly, calmly drinks tea. Roro claims that this is not her first time seeing this necklace, and she didn't take it. Of course, now she's pretending she doesn't know anything, Sophia shouted. What low behavior! Roro was very worried that the Elder Lord was angry with her. Roro was very scared. She had her head down and was shaking like an aspen leaf. She should say she hadn't done anything, but she couldn't, and then the Duchess couldn't take it anymore. She said, Sophia, you've gotten to this point, pounding her fist on the table. That you dared to touch a child is no longer forgivable, the Duchess said. And you still know this girl without any proof? Sophia shouted, What, you suspect me? I didn't think she was like that. How long was she going to lie? While the girls were shouting over each other, Julius couldn't stand it and said, Enough! You're an adult. You're not ashamed to accuse a small child, Julius added. Yulu hugged his little sister and said, It's okay. She has nothing to worry about. They will protect her. Sophia and Lydia continued to resent it further, but Julius again said, Enough! Watch your tongue, Lydia, Julius said. The evidence is there. She believes her daughter, Sophia said. Persera, that is a clear insult to the Marquis of Rodham, Sophia said. You won't get away with this, Sophia shouted. And then the doors opened and the Duke came in saying, She was the first to cross that line. Sophia cried out, Brother, listen to me. But he walked past and went to his now current daughter. He crouched down on one knee, took her little hands, which were all wounded, and said, I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner, Rosny. Got up and said he heard what she did to that little girl, Sophia. She started making excuses that she didn't beat her. The mentor did, meaning she hired her and had her beat the little girl, Duke said. He, as the legal guardian of the little girl, has every right to punish Sophia. Looking at Lydia, the Duke said, Look for a new godfather now. The girls were furious, one shouting, Brother, the other, Uncle. That wretch took her brother Julius and even her uncle from her, said Lydia. The Duchess walked up to the girl and said, You must have been frightened, little girl. But Roro was very brave and said it was all right. Persera told her she had to wait a little longer, and it would all be over soon. Sophia asked if he realized that turning his back on the Marquis of Rodham would do him no good, and she wondered how he could leave her and Lydia for that wretch. But the Duke approached the girl and said that they had no right to insult this little girl because she would soon be their daughter. Rosny didn't believe his words. She was shocked that he would actually consider her his daughter. Lydia asked her uncle, What is he talking about? What kind of daughter can we make? But her mom told her to stop already and they should leave already. Before leaving, Lydia turned around and glared angrily at Rosny. After that, she ran after her mother. As the door slammed shut, Andy ran up to the girl and hugged her, asking if she was okay. He explained that he had told his father everything, that they dared to torture her. But the Duchess turned to the girl and asked if she would like to take a short walk with Andy. She said there were some very pretty flowers blooming outside and it was definitely worth looking at. Before leaving the room, Rosny looked at the dresser and saw the necklace there. She decided to take it with her. When the children were out the door, Jarzak said that they must not see this unpleasant picture, after which he asked that all the staff of the mansion be summoned now. As they walked down the hall, Andy asked the girl, "Is she really going to give it to him herself? She'd better tell the maid." The people didn't say it was important to her, and the maid, she could still accuse her of stealing it. Andy, that she's too kind. Well, when they went outside, they were immediately met by Lydia. She turned to the girl and asked her how she dared to take her place. She came up and swung around and homeward, asking who the hell she even was. The girl thought she was going to get hit, but after a minute the hit didn't happen, and when she opened her eyes she saw Andy in front of her. The guy put his cheek instead of hers, and Lydia saw it and asked why he did it. Andy said that Roro was his little sister. He then turned to the girl and told them to get going already, and asked if he was cool. But then, as they were about to leave Lydia's side, she asked if the girl realized that she was bringing trouble to the family. But Andy told her to watch her mouth, because he had warned her. Rosny ran forward and stopped her brother and told him he had waited a while and calmed down. Afterward, she took the lady's hand and gave her the necklace. She thanked her, saying that she had learned a lot because of her. Her words were a lesson, and she would try not to bring trouble to this house. Hearing this, Lydia became very angry. But Rosny said she didn't have to worry, because everything's going to be okay now. At this moment, all the workers in the manor were gathered. Many of them were talking. What happened? Could someone be in trouble? At this moment, one of the girls thought that she was only helping the lady and her daughter with their luggage. She didn't understand why she had been summoned then, as if some sort of punishment awaited her. One of Rosny's maids thought the Duke would eventually be recognized. The girl just watched all the insults the maids were making behind her back, and there was nothing she could do to them. She didn't stop them. The girl thought she should just treat her a little better, but she ended up being just like them. At that moment, the Duke began to descend. He asked the head maid if she knew why he had called everyone here. The girl bowed, but answered nothing. When the Duke said that it was better to let her say for herself what they had all done, the girl replied that she honestly didn't know why he had called them in. But the Duke said she had brazenly beaten the girl, the future princess of the Marquez family, and asked if she would admit her guilt. The girl began at once to apologize. She said she was merely following Duchess Sophia's orders for personal reasons. The Duke asked her how she dared to call her a duchess. The Marquesa had long since given up that title, and he asked if she dared to mock the Marquesan family. He revokes the title given to her by the past Duke of Mark and orders her off the estate. The maids who were standing nearby couldn't believe it, that he had dismissed her so easily. He walked over to them and thought that they probably thought that if she didn't fit, it was too much. If such drastic measures are not taken, they will abuse the little girl again. After that, he said that now each of them would be punished, because once he knows all this, he won't allow lies. At this point in the street, Lydia had already left. She left the necklace, and when Rosny picked it up, Engel said they came to give her the necklace in person. She left it just like that, and left. He said, okay, so be it. They should be about it. After that, he took the necklace from her and threw it away. At that moment, the girl remembered that she had already been hit, and they urgently needed to go to a healer. Andy said that if she called him brother, it wouldn't hurt anymore. Raz told me that, but if you put medicine on it, it hurts less. The boy said she was too smart, but at that moment, Rosny didn't look to the side and saw a lot of maids leaving. Everything began to wonder where they were all going. Seeing the boy used for whipping, she wondered why he didn't leave with Lady Lydia. Well, when she looked more closely, she saw N. The girl ran up to the maid and asked her where she was going. As N was about to answer, so a man came up to them and asked if the mistress knew her. The girl replied that of course she knew her since she had always moved away. The girl said she treated her very well, unlike the others. But at that moment Andy ran up to them and asked what she was doing there. The butler said that by order of the Duke and Duchess, They would all be banished. When the girl heard this, she was very upset. After that, she cried out that you can't do that. At this time in her office, the Duchess was reviewing the papers and didn't understand how they could torture the baby so much, how such a thing was even possible. The girl said she should have been more attentive, but the Duke replied that he hadn't been paying attention either, so let her not blame only herself. Yus asked his father if he was going to punish them. Verdix replied that of course, and that it would be a lesson to them. Verdix said he'd kick them all out without letters of recommendation, and getting kicked off the estate without letters of recommendation is career-ending. But Yus said it wasn't enough for those who did this to their baby girl. Something more was needed. The Duchess came up to him and said that was quite enough. The little girl was very fragile, crying over little things, and more punishment would bring her great pain. When the Duchess was about to say that, and it would be even better to keep it from her, the butler came running in and said they were in trouble. At this point in the street, Rosny clutched at the maid's skirt and told her not to leave. The girl was crying and screaming. At that moment, Orange ran outside and ran up to the girl. Rosny shouted out for Mistress not to kick Anne out because she was good. She was the only one who treated her well. But Mistress said that first the girl should stop crying and calm down. Then they would decide everything calmly. Then the Duchess turned to the maid, apologized to her, and told her that there had been a misunderstanding. But the maid bowed and said there was no misunderstanding. The Duchess said she ought to have said she was not to blame. So why was she silent? But the maid replied that she could not say that she was not guilty of anything. She had seen the other maids abusing the little girl and could not stop them.